Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to do another video about um what's going on with regards to the man who assassinated Bobby Kennedy in 1968, Sirhan Sirhan. Um, a little background information about this situation. Of course, this man now, Sirhan Sirhan, is up for parole. He assassinated Bobby Kennedy in 1968 in a hotel in California. Bobby Kennedy, of course, the slain brother of former President John F. Kennedy, who was president from 1960 to 1963, and he himself was assassinated in 1963 by Lee Harvey Oswald. But with this situation, Sirhan Sirhan was the guy who murdered Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy was a very special candidate, especially for the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party, he was their hopeful. He was their guy, because they had really been struggling after 1964. His brother passes away. The brother's vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, runs for re-election on his behalf, and the country completely sympathizes with him, to the sense that it was a complete blowout of Barry Goldwater in 1964. Like only one southern state, I think, went for Barry Goldwater in '64. That's how much of a blowout it was. But by 1968, the game had completely changed. Go back to the video in my archives about the Chicago Seven. I speak a little bit about the background of what had happened in '68. It was a complete and utter blowout. It was completely different because of the Gulf of Tonkin. Hey, Lisa. Finally, the chat is working. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, an incident in which Lyndon Johnson and the government had reported that the Vietnamese communists had taken down one of our boats, and it was later found out to be a lie. So Johnson later accelerated and continued to send more troops into this unpopular war, and the people were against this war. So by '68, Johnson says, "I'm not going to seek the nomination of my party anymore. I'm dropping out of the race." So it was between Eugene McCarthy, who was a very leftist kind of candidate, kind of like a Bernie Sanders, and Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy was just coming from a party, and when he had won the nomination in a primary in California, and that's when Sirhan Sirhan shot him at this hotel. Now, who is Sirhan Sirhan? Sirhan Sirhan was a Palestinian Christian militant from Jerusalem. I said in another video that he was from Bethlehem, but he wasn't. He was from Jerusalem. And he was upset. Well, there are two theories. One is the theory that he was upset that Bobby Kennedy had supported the Israelis in the 1967 war, which is called in history the Six-Day War. And that's the war where Israel took control of Jordan. In 1948, after the War of Independence, there was a split, but Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan took, which was called Transjordan, took some territories in the West Bank, and Egypt took territories in the Gaza Strip, and Syria took territories in the Golan Heights. But after '67, the Israelis took all that over. So what was supposed to be the Arab allotted land between the Arabs and the Jews took the Jews or slash the Israelis took it all over, and they still control it to this day. There's a lot of videos that I did on that, but it was sort of a proxy war, because on the one hand, we the Americans supported the Israelis, of course, and The Russians, the Soviet Union, our Cold War enemy, supported the Palestinians because the Palestinians had the backing of Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was a socialist, president of Egypt. He was a socialist. He was left leaning. And they had also supported him in 57, 10 years before, when he drove the British out of the Suez Canal. So they again supported the Russians and the Soviets, again supported the Palestinians in 67, and we supported the Israelis. And Robert Kennedy was one of the people, as a senator, that voted for the Six-Day War. It was a terrible defeat on the part of the Arab people. They still remember it to this day. Not as bad as what they call the Nakba, the disaster that that was the creation of the state of Israel, the War of Independence in '48, but it's kind of just as bad because like 4 or 5 Arab countries lost a war in 6 days. Like it's the shortest war in human history. And Sirhan Sirhan was pissed about this, and he was a Christian. People say, well, he had to be some kind of Islamic militant, right? Because you know that's who supports these Palestinians, these Islamic militants. No, at that time in the '60s and '70s, the Palestinian movement was secular. It wasn't religious. It didn't have a religious basis. Hamas, which is the group that controls the Gaza Strip now since 2006, they hadn't been founded yet. Most of the Palestinian resistance, most of the PLO, like Yasser Arafat's group, what they call Fatah right now, one of the two factions of the Palestinian Authority, was secular. You know, they were left wing. They were funded by a lot by the Soviet Union and funded by a lot of left wing governments, but they weren't uh, religious. Like they weren't religious Islamic fundamentalists. So incidents like this, incidents like um, the hijacking of the plane in NB Uganda in Africa in '76, in which Netanyahu's brother died, and incidents like Black September, where the militants took control of the Olympics in Munich, those were secular Palestinian resistance movements, not religious based. More connected to. So Christians like Sirhan Sirhan would have been involved with stuff like this, and George Habash, who engineered the hijacking in '67 at Edinburgh, would have been involved in stuff like this, whereas they won't be and wouldn't have been involved in some of the newer attacks on Israel because they're mostly just all Muslims, you know. So, but another interesting theory that people put forth is that that wasn't the reason. That the reason was that he was controlled. He was mind controlled. He was under a program of MK Ultra, which is a mind control program that the Nazis and the Japanese instituted during World War II to control people's minds, to brainwash them to do things, and then they would do these things, and then they wouldn't remember. Because after he did this incident, he claimed he did remember it. His lawyer claimed he didn't remember it, that he didn't do it of his own agency. He later recanted and gave a different reason, but it was sort of like with the Son of Sam killings. David Berkowitz confessed to it, but then David then later said, well, somebody else was involved. This devil worshiping group was involved, and then I believe that, Lisa. That is very interesting. No, I think there is certain stuff that governments and stuff could use to control people, but I don't know because there are so many conspiracies concerning the Kennedys, even conspiracies that Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who shot John Kennedy, was not the real person to want to shoot John Kennedy. But it was very interesting that um, uh, Kennedy's political opponents benefited from what happened. You know what I mean? After he died, Johnson then launched the Tet Offensive, which was one of the worst offensives, killing thousands of civilians in Vietnam. After that, and then Nixon came in with a crushing defeat. Nixon's defeat of the Democrats in 1968 was akin to what happened to the Democrats in 2016, the defeat of Hillary Clinton. Nobody thought nobody thought Nixon would win. You know what I mean? Because he was crushingly defeated by Kennedy in 60. I mean, not crushingly. It was a narrow defeat, and you know, but he was defeated by Kennedy in 60, and nobody thought he would have the chance to win in 68. You know, but he did. It was a shock to people, and he didn't. He campaigned on peace. He famously Nixon held up the two peace signs and everything, and he campaigned that he was going to pull us out of this war because this war, this war in the 60s, the Vietnam War, was one of the worst, was the most unpopular war that America had ever been in. We didn't want to be there and we didn't want to stay there. It was a civil war between a communist faction in Vietnamese government led by Ho Chi Minh and a government that we backed in the north. And it was a civil war and we were involved, and our people, our troops, didn't want to stay there. Our people were on the streets protesting. Even Martin Luther King, who had died this same year in 68, also protested against the Vietnam War. And people believe that Lyndon Johnson had him killed as well, because it was Johnson who put through the Civil Rights Act 64, 65, and then King goes and turns on him, and King then starts speaking against the war. Famously, Muhammad Ali was stripped of the heavyweight championship because he didn't want to serve in the war. The war was highly unpopular. So after Bobby Kennedy gets assassinated, Nixon campaigns on peace, but he doesn't pull the troops out of the war until 75. And not only that, famously, like covered in the movie Hamburger Hill, he starts to drop bombs on neighboring Cambodia that was also controlled by the communist Khmer Rouge Party and Pol Pot. So he gets in 68, doesn't pull us out till 75. He's not even the president by 75 because he resigns in 74 because of Watergate. It was interesting because nobody thought he would win in 68, but everybody thought he would win in 72, and 72 was when he cheated, when he busted into his opponent's his opponent's um, his opponent's campaign headquarters in the Watergate Hotel, and they had him on tape, and finally he resigned. So when he caught the world by surprise in 68, they never thought he would win. And in 72, when he cheated, people did think he would win. He didn't need to cheat, but he cheats anyway. And so it's funny, when he needed to cheat, Nixon cheated. Yeah, Nixon cheated. At least that's what Watergate was. Watergate was Nixon busting into George McGovern, his opponents, in 72. He cheated. He busted into his opponent's headquarters, and he got classified information um, from his opponent's headquarters. So, and when he was caught on tape doing it, he was exposed by Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward, the same guy that made that book about Trump, the one I got reviewed on my channel. He was exposed by Bob Woodward, the tapes, the Nixon tapes, on tape. So then he resigned in '74, and then his vice president Gerald Ford took over. And Gerald Ford was the one who pulled us out finally of Vietnam. We left in '75, and Saigon fell. We lost the war. The communists took over the country anyway. They still own the country to this day. It was sort of like Cabo. But I find it interesting how in history have been different if Bobby Kennedy was not assassinated. We obviously wouldn't have stayed in Vietnam for another 7 years. We would have left that war, and things would have been different on the home front as well. Right. Yes, Lisa, history is repeating itself. You could say Trump was a cheater, and then Biden was a weak president, pulling out of uh, and it's funny too because um, now I don't think Biden is a weak president. I don't know. I don't think Gerald Ford was a weak president for pulling us out of Vietnam either. It's just that these wars we didn't need to be in these places for as long as we were in there. So they weren't necessarily weak. Like, what do people expect? What did people expect back then, and what do people expect now? Like, you're dealing with regions of the world, Vietnam and Afghanistan both, that engage in heavy guerrilla warfare. The terrain is very different. It was just like when we defeated the British in 1776. We used guerrilla tactics that the British didn't use, and that's how we were able to beat them. That's how a small population that is less industrialized but more dedicated is able to beat a large population. We should know that better than anybody. That's part of our history. That's how the colonists, the militia colonists, with help from the French, were able to defeat the British. Here we were the little guys. We were the little militia guys with just hand me down guns and hand me down outfits, taking on a big empire. And our little ragtag bunch was able to defeat that big British Empire. Well, the Vietnamese were able to do that with us. The Afghan people were able to do that with us. You know, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. This happens a lot in history, that big armies are defeated by little armies that are way more dedicated and have way more dirtier tactics. That's what the Vietnamese had. So people at that time were saying that Ford was weak or that Bobby was weak because Bobby had a debate with Ronald Reagan, who was the governor of California. I think he was the governor of California at the time, or he was running to be the governor of California at the time. Um, he was definitely um, I don't know, Lisa. I mean, 77 years old is pretty old. But this, and I was, you know, most people don't know who he is. You know what I mean? They don't. He's not somebody. He's not like John Wilkes Booth. He's not like Mark David Chapman. He's not like Mark David Chapman, who shot John Lennon in 1980. He's not like Yolanda Saldivar, who shot Selena. It's not like Eric Holder, who shot Nipsey Hussle. He's not John Lee Harvey Oswald, who shot his brother, or James Earl Ray, that shot MLK. The, these people are famous assassins. This guy is like the guy, like the incident is famous, but the guy is not famous. You know what I mean? If you post or infamous. You ask 10 people, well, tell me who Sirhan Sirhan is. Maybe if they're a little bit older, if they're the boomer generation, they probably do know who he is. But his name definitely doesn't ring bells in the same way that some of these other people's names that I mentioned do. You know what I'm saying? Some Jesse Ventura, the wrestler, famously had a theory that all famous assassins have three names. So you have Mark David Chapman, who assassinated John Lennon, Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated JFK, and John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln. But this guy doesn't have three names, so that theory goes out the window. John Hinckley Jr., the attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan in 1980. I mean, 1981. Um, this guy, what his life will be like, I don't know. People don't even remember it. So, his kids, Bobby Kennedy's kids are forgiving the guy. So it was years ago. He's remorseful for it. He's sorry for it. Who knows if that was true, that he was mind controlled, or even if he was pumped up politically to do something like that. Still, you know, time will heals all wounds. You know what I mean? So and they've had tragedy after tragedy happen to them. They've only had two assassinations, but Bobby's son did die in I believe it was 2004, and Bobby Jr. died in a skiing accident. So, but one thing I was gonna say, I think that what really well, okay, two of it, not all his kids, two of them, okay, two of them. I know Douglas Kennedy, and I think his sister is forgiving him, but I don't know what his life will be like, Lisa. Some of them are forgiving him, some of them aren't. I don't know. But I was gonna say, as far as politics, what would the Democratic Party really didn't bounce was not able to bounce back after JFK died until Barack Obama got into office, and that was years and years later because they had Kennedy. Okay, Johnson messed up. His legacy was tarnished by putting us in the war in Vietnam. Then he drops out. He doesn't run for a second term. Then okay, Nixon, Republican, Ford, Republican. Jimmy Carter, he fucks up. He appears weak because of the Iran thing. The Iranian militants stormed the embassy, hold 4,000 hostages for many days. He has the Iran thing. It's a botch on his part. He looks weak. Then Reagan comes in. Reagan does 2 terms. Bush one does 2 terms. Clinton comes in '92, and he has the scandal he has, and he looks bad in the public eye. Even though he has 2 terms, he still has a tarnished legacy because of what happened with Monica Lewinsky. So, and then Bush Jr. comes in, and the Democratic Party looked completely bad until Barack Obama. So, the death of Bobby Kennedy prevented an entire party for a generation from looking honorable or looking strong in the eyes of the American people, in the eyes of America's enemies overseas. Um, America had a legacy. The Democrats established themselves post Kennedy up until Obama, I believe. Of they never win elections. They're completely weak and inept. You know what I mean? They have good ideas, but they're not able to communicate those good. They weren't able to communicate those good ideas to the American people either effectively, because either They don't know how to govern. They're completely incompetent when it comes to governing like Jimmy Carter, or they're corrupt and they cover up their own personal misgivings like Clinton, or they lie about the wars like Johnson. Now, not that the Republicans are any better; they fuck up too. You know what I'm saying? But they were just better at covering their tracks for the longest time. So this kind of thing, this thing of Bobby Kennedy dying and his brother dying, the Kennedy assassinations, they set the Democratic Party back for like a generation or so, and that's really what enabled the Republican Party to dominate from then on. Because after 1968, the switch was complete. Because after the Civil War, the entire South all voted for Democrats until 1968, and the switch was complete. And Southern states really didn't go for another Democrat really at all until Virginia, I think it was, and Florida switched for Obama in 2008. So for an entire generation or two, um, the Democratic Party was in in a disaster. Now, post Obama, with the thing with Biden, I don't know if that's going to be another thing that's going to stick in people's head. And, you know, they're going to say, well, Biden was weak. He botched with the Kabul rescue. So maybe we're not going to vote for Republicans again for another two generations. I mean, excuse me, Democrats for another two generations. I don't know. I hope not. You know what I mean? I hope that doesn't happen. But you never know with the American people. You know what I mean? We want to appear as we are strong on the world stage. We want to our people want to appear as if we have good leadership, somebody that could talk a good game, somebody that's charismatic. And unfortunately, Bobby was the last of the last for the Democrats from for about 40 years. And I hope that doesn't happen again. But like Lisa said, a lot of his kids are not forgiving him. So, some of them aren't forgiving him, some of them ain't. I always wanted to see another Kennedy in the White House. Um, it was interesting because Ted Kennedy was the one that, even though Barack Obama wasn't a Kennedy, he kind of was a Kennedy because his ideological father, in a sense, was Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy was the one who told him in 2008 to run, that he had to capitalize on the moment. I mean, and he did. You know, he gave that speech in 2004 at Kerry's um, nomination, and people loved Obama. The not a red America, not a blue America, not a black America, not a white America. And people loved Obama, and that was when Ted Kennedy told Barack Obama to run. You know what I mean? He had the chance, and Obama did it. And like I said, in my view, in my opinion, as a student of American history, it was Barack Obama who resurrected the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, that people that were Democrats could be proud of somebody that was strong, somebody that was no scandals involved, somebody that was a good politician. We didn't have that as a Democrat for many years. We had never had it in my lifetime. You know what I mean? Yes, we all loved Clinton, but Clinton didn't really embody, plus the scandal, but Clinton didn't really embody the legacy, the left wing legacy of the Democratic Party of helping the poor, being sympathetic to civil rights, things that the Kennedys were all about, things that the Kennedys were advocates for. Clinton didn't really embody that. Jimmy Carter really didn't embody such things. He did later on in his life after the presidency, but when he was the president, no, not really. He wasn't talking about that. You know what I mean? So that really hardcore left wing or that strong left wing legacy that the Kennedys had, we didn't have that until Barack Obama. So, and that was a tradition in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, going all the way back to even the 1820s, when the Democratic Party was formed, Andrew Jackson, okay, yeah, the the concept of poor people or the concept of the common man did not attempt to appeal to minorities like Native Americans or African Americans, but still he created the framework for what Democrats would be. And then, of course, FDR took that further in the 30s, and Kennedy took that even further in the 60s. And Bobby embodied that just like his brother did, because he even gave the speech when MLK died. And, he was heavily working with civil rights workers in Delano, California, when Cesar Chavez did his march and when Martin Luther King did his march. And other Democrats after him didn't really embody that until Obama. So Obama, to me, even though Obama's not a Kennedy, he kind of is a Kennedy in an ideological sense. But I wonder, what if Bobby had won? We probably would have never had Nixon. We probably never would have had the Reagan Revolution. We probably never would have had the two Bushes. We probably never would have had Iraq and Afghanistan, and we definitely would have stayed in Vietnam for as long as we did. Um, it's just something to think about. You know what I mean? Alternative history. What if Bobby Kennedy was not assassinated and he had won the election in '68? We probably wouldn't. We probably somebody would probably be able to control the riots that went on in Detroit and the riots that went on throughout all the major cities except for Harlem. Harlem, interestingly enough, did not go into riots in '68 after Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King were assassinated because um, the leader of the Five Percenters, Nation of Gods and Earths, had a deal with the Mayor Wagner at that time, and he was able to hold a lot of influence with the people. So um, that's how New York, at least Harlem, was different in a sense with the guy they called the Father, the leader of the 5%, is Father Allah. But that's a whole nother different story. And with this guy Sirhan Sirhan, yeah, this is the first. This I was reading an article that this is the first incident that is considered a major engagement with us in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Like the first incident is before Black September. This is before, um, the Yom Kippur War in '73. It's before First Intifada, which was '87. The Second Intifada, which was 2000. Before the Sheikh Jarrah thing that happened last year. Before all these major things that we were involved with concerning the Arab-Israeli conflict, this was the first one, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. So, thank you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see when my next video is coming out. Lisa, I'm glad you contributed. I'm glad you were able to contribute. I don't know what the hell's going on with YouTube, but I love you guys. Peace.